Hello, welcome to part 3 of Linocut Fish. In part 1 and 2 I talked about how to draw a design on the block and carve it, and in this part we're going to print the block. I'm going to use a ink called Caligo Safe Wash Relief Ink made by Cranfield, and this is an oil-based ink but it washes up with soap and water, so I'm just going to put a bit of ink down here. Now I've got just a piece of white perspex here which I'm using as an ink slab. Don't need very much ink, so I'm only going to do one print. Now this ink goes a long way, so even if I was doing several prints that would be enough ink there. And I've got a very basic roller here. When you buy a roller you want to make sure it's a slightly soft one. This is made by SD, and the most common rollers are the red handled ones. You want to avoid those because they're a bit hard. The blue handled ones are a little bit softer, like I say, and that just helps get an even coverage on the block. I've also got here a ink knife. It's just like a scraper from the hardware store. That's quite useful for cleaning up and also just for mixing inks and spreading inks. Getting the right amount of ink on the roller is key to getting a good print. A bit of my roller there. You'd get too much ink on the roller, you're going to find that any fine details in the print, I haven't got a lot of fine detail in here, but this bit for instance here can start to fill in with ink, and when you print it you lose that fine detail. So that's what happens if you have too much ink. If you don't have enough ink, obviously you don't get a very strong print. It comes out a bit light and patchy. So I'm just going to roll this out. Now when you roll out the ink, instead of doing this, just going back and forth, you want to lift the roller each time and go back to the start. That spreads the ink much more quickly. And you want to press down a little bit as you're rolling and roll. You can roll side to side as well. So we're looking for a nice even coverage on the roller. My roller, this has got a bit of a dent in it, but it's not a problem. We need a little bit more ink. You can judge the amount of ink from the sound it makes and also from the texture of the ink on the roller. I don't know if you can see that. There's a sort of slight texture to that. If that becomes like an orange peel texture, that means usually that's too much ink. So I usually aim for about it's more or less the texture of sandpaper. So if I can get the camera to focus, that's roughly the texture you're looking for. Depends what you're doing. If you're printing by hand, you do need slightly more ink. I do most of my printing on an etching press or a book press, in which case you don't need quite as much ink. So I'm just going to turn this sideways. Ideally you want a roller that's wider than your block. So on this particular block, the background, I've carved away most of the background, but I've left one or two bits of texture there. I'm hoping that will pick up the ink, and I might find the odd area picks up ink. If you decide that you don't want that, you can take a rag and wipe it clean before you print, or you can go back and carve those bits out. The other thing to watch out for is if you've got these fluffy bits of the hessian from the back, you can trim them with a pair of scissors. Make sure you do it away from your ink, because they do pick up a tiny bit of ink and it comes up as a smudge mark on your print there. So I'm going to turn the fish that way and just roll onto the block using a little bit of downward pressure. Just do one roll across. So you can see these bits of texture picking up there. I'm just going to get a little bit more ink. Now it's a good idea to keep turning the block as you go, so you're coming in from different angles. Oops. Oops. Okay, and this roller has a stand there, so we're not using it. You put it down that way up and the ink doesn't go everywhere, which is especially important if you're printing at home like I am. So let me have a closer look at that. That's pretty good. There's not really any bits that are picking up ink that I wouldn't want. You get a good idea how it's going to print. Obviously it's going to be back to front, so I'll get my paper ready and we'll print that. So I've got my block ready to print here. I'm going to use this wooden spoon, which is well used. It's got a nice smooth shiny surface there, which works really well. The paper I'm going to use is Hosho. It's a Japanese paper and it comes on a pad, an A3 pad. You can get it in a lot of art shops. And Hosho has a smooth side and a rough side. So I'm going to print on the smooth side. So I'm not going to bother with registration for this, I'm just going to put the paper down as straight as I can. And once the paper's down, you want to try not to move it. So if you hold it with one hand like that while you rub with the spoon with the other hand, and you can just do little circles, you can go back and forth, it's up to you. And you will see, I don't know if you can see that in the film, as you rub, the ink starts to soak into the paper and you start to see the image through the paper. So you can see if there's any bits you've missed. Now you can do this with regular cartridge paper as well, that works pretty well. Japanese papers, certain Japanese papers which are designed for printing woodblock prints are ideal for this because they're very strong and quite absorbent and lightweight and smooth, so they take quite a lot of rubbing without falling apart. Now when you're going around the edge, you want to just sort of feel your way around, make sure you haven't missed any bits. And you can check your progress. If you're very careful, hold the paper down with one hand and just lift up and see if there's any bits you missed. So I can see this little fish here is not coming out yet, so I'll give him a bit more. There's other tools you can use for this. There's a tool called a baron, which comes in many different forms. You can get bamboo ones, plastic ones, and ball bearing ones. They work well for some kinds of images. Probably this image would be okay, but I find the spoon tends to give you a more concentrated pressure. Hand printing also has the advantage that you can print some areas more strongly than others if you want to. So to do the other half, you can either swap your hands around, or if you're very careful you can just swing the whole thing around. Once you've done a bit of rubbing, the ink will stick the block to the paper, so shouldn't move if you do that. You'll find out when you lift up the paper at the end. Now it does take a bit of patience, this technique. It's a lot slower than printing on the press, but there's something quite nice about printing your prints this way. And when you've done a few prints from a block, you get to you get a feel for the block, and you know where all the edges are. So I'm pressing quite hard, and you'll find when you're hand printing, it does pick up more of these extra bits around the edge because the spoon pushes the paper into the dips of the block. With a press, especially if you print without a blanket, it tends to just pick up right off the surface, and you don't get quite as much of that extra stuff, extra noise I call it. Right, I think we're just about there. I'm going to have a little check, see. That size alright. Let's check the head end. Not too bad. You will find slight variations of the prints. As always with printmaking, that's the beauty of it. So sort of depends on the individual whether you want to get the print perfect or if you don't mind a bit of texture. Right, let's have a look. So to pick up the paper, you hold one edge down and lift it. That's not too bad. I'm pretty happy with that. So I'll print a few more of those, and if there's any bits you want to change, you can always take more bits out. If you're careful, you can do that without cleaning the block. You just tend to get a bit inky. But be careful with the bits that you've removed because they do tend to stick to the ink. So you have to take those away quite carefully. So I'll leave that there. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back with more videos soon. Bye.